Jeff, why don't you put up the PowerPoint for me? The mask we hide behind, don't we? We're church people. We hide behind stuff all the time.
Next one.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Okay. We start kids at a very, very young age. Do you know Purim was last week in the Jewish calendar? And one of the big cool things about Purim is the fact that they have masquerade balls. So in God's infinite wisdom, for the last 6,000 years, He prepared the material that you're going to hear this morning. Yeah. But we teach our kids to hide behind stuff. You know, Mom and Dad, you know, we come to church and we put on these masks that everything's okay. And the kids watch this. And if you don't think your kids and grandkids pick up on your traits and how you go about masking the stuff in your life, you're a fool. Kids learn everything. Monkey see, monkey do. Grandma puts on the smiley face at church, and then she goes home and has half the deacons and the church staff and the pastor's wife for lunch in front of the grandkids. And the kids learn this stuff. And here we are, products of our parents. There's stuff that still happens. I'm 57 years old, and I'm out there, and I respond to something, and I have that, no, on my mom. Yeah, you do too, if you're honest with yourself. Go ahead, Jeff. I was thinking about what are some of the coolest mask experiences. Because you see, you can never tell with a mask sometimes that you're wearing one. I love Mission Impossible. I love the latex things that they do with the little rubber faces. But if you go back to the MeTV late night on Sunday night, they have the original Mission Impossible with Garrett Morris and Leonard Nimoy and those guys. Well, they could make a black man white, because they would have the little rubber things on their hands, and literally you did not know sometimes that it was a guy behind that lady's face. You know, they were so awesome.
Next one.
Here's a guy who created a mask of himself. Now, I don't know about you, it'd be pretty scary to have a goofy smile on your face and to take off the mask and the goofy smile is still there. Yeah, creepy, isn't it? Think how creepy we are sometimes with the stuff that we hide behind. Go ahead, Jeff. I'll leave that up there for the rest of the time. There's stuff in our life that is keeping us from being who God's designed us to be. I'm not going to get into too much more about the mask. I'm going to talk about some of the problems. Turn with me to Mark chapter 6. I'm going to talk about unbelief today. Because there's some things, fear, doubt, unbelief. There's stuff that, listen, you are going to struggle with the rest of your Christian experience. You say, how do I just struggle? I understand the doubt part, but unbelief? Yeah. Listen, if those who love Jesus, who hung with Jesus, who saw the miracles, who experienced the miracles, who went out and did miracles themselves, if they struggled with unbelief, who do you think you're going to be? You know, I can walk on water. Well, listen, it's okay. It's a club. Hi, I'm Chuck. I struggle with unbelief. Comforting, knowing we're all poor schmoes who are just bumping through the night trying to get things done. But yet, God has a plan and a purpose. We're going to start in verse 1 of Mark 6. And soak it in. Jesus is in his hometown. He's in his home synagogue. He's in his home church. He's with his people. People who should know who he is. He went away from there and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astonished, saying, "Where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James, and Joseph, and Judas, and Simon? Are not these his sisters here with us?" And they took offense with him. And Jesus said to him, "A prophet is not without honor except in his hometown, and among his relatives and his own household." And he could do no mighty works there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. Let's stop there and ponder this for a second. God's talking about being with family, close friends, people that you've spent all your life with, and they didn't believe in him. And yet, they were witnesses, and they had experienced everything that he did. Well, think about that for a second. Wow. I'm hanging with Jesus, the Son of God. I see him turn the whites of a blind man who you couldn't even see their pupils because of the scales on their eyes, to someone who had these bright blue eyes. I saw him take the limbs of a crippled person who was lame from birth, who couldn't walk. And all of a sudden, I saw their legs strengthen and fill out, and their muscles being restored perfectly. You see, when Jesus healed somebody, it wasn't halfway. It wasn't part way. It was they were made whole. And these people saw all of it. You know, I mean, can you imagine? You know, we know Jesus was sarcastic. We know Jesus was a very humorous person in how he approached people. I mean, can you imagine him, God, the Son of God, as a little kid, going down the local creek and practice being Moses and parting the creek and saying, "Look what I can do," you know? All the little fishies are all divided, you know, and there's a dry spot going across. I mean, listen, you don't think he did little stuff like that? I'm not being sacrilegious. I'm pointing out the fact that he was real. He was human in God form. So many of us, you know, this is our family. One of the things I discovered as church, you know, I did not have a close family growing up. We had a big family, and they were just all over the place. And they weren't really a family that got along. They were a family that had a lot of infighting. You know, and if somebody showed up to this, other people left. You know, I mean, it was just not pretty. You know, it was very ugly many times. And when I came to Christ, I found a church full of people that were broken just like me, people I could identify with, people that I was growing and becoming and learning, and I had these gifts, and so many times over the years, the people closest to me, the church folks that I hung out with that were my extended family, were some of the people that hurt me the most. Were some of the people who didn't believe in me. Some of the people that were saying, "No, God's not in that." Some of the same people that said, "You know, you don't have that gift." Or, "Why are you trying so hard? Why don't you quit?" He marveled at their unbelief. The Son of God marveled at his closest friends and family that they had unbelief. Don't you feel that way sometimes? Listen, this whole series, I'm trying to set the tone with the negative here, because you need to come to this personal thing today that you say to yourself, "No more. I'm done with this. I'm not putting up with this anymore. I want what God has for my life. I want to develop the gifts that God has for." We have one of the most, if you look at the ratio of people that we have in our church, of being creative, we have one of the most creative core group. We have 40, 50 people that are involved with our ministry here, they're all creative. Every single one of you are Renaissance people. What do I mean by a Renaissance person? You're a five-tool. You have 4 or 5 things in your life that you're good at. Some of you are gifted musically and paint and sketch and draw and sculpt and write. And you're eloquent when you speak. You have all this awesome stuff in your life. And yet, I look at you, and most of you are snake bit, to use a Yukon phrase. And my buddy Nick Bickus. What does snake bit mean? Which means you've been bit and you're going to die. What do I mean by that? You have all this massive gift and talent before God and using none of it because of unbelief, because of doubt, because of fear. And unless you break free of that, you will stand one day before Jesus Christ on his throne, and he'll look at you and he'll say, "What up, dude? What's with all this? Why didn't you believe me? Why didn't you step out in faith and use what I gave you to use?" And it'll be a sad day. And I'll be there as your pastor, because I'm going to have to give an account of this very thing I'm saying this morning. Folks, we got to break free. Flip down with me a little bit. I'm going to skip to death. This is a very traumatic passage for Jesus. He loses John the Baptist. But I want us to look at the feeding of the 5,000, because within that, there are nuggets that will unlock unbelief in your life. Look down at verse 30. The apostles returned to Jesus and told them all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest for a while." I like the fact that Jesus went out to the wilderness and just hung out. He goes, "We're only camping, we're going to hang out." And for many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And when they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves, now many saw them going and recognizing them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. Stop right there. If you read the 4 different accounts of this, Jesus was trying to get rid of the crowds to get alone with his guys. He wanted to unpack this experience, how the 12 went out, and they went out to minister for the very first time without him. And he wanted to hear their experiences and talk with them. And he knew that if he stayed where he was going to be just inundated with people who had needs. And he wanted to get away with them. So he jumps in the boat and they scoot across the sea. And as they're leaving, everyone said, "Hey, I know where they're going." And there were even more people when he got where he was going on the other side. So he couldn't escape. He was just going to have to minister while he was ministering. Now many saw them going, and recognizing them, they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. That's interesting. Talk about a slow boat. When he went ashore, he saw the great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And it grew late, and his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place. The hour's late. Send these folks away. Let them go to the countryside, the villages, to buy something to eat." But he answered to them, "Just give them something to eat." And they said to him, his disciples, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they found out, they came back and said, "We have 5 and 2 fish." And he commanded them to sit down in groups in the green grass. So they sat down in groups by the hundreds and fifties, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and gave a blessing, and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish amongst all of them. And they ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 full baskets of broken pieces and of fish. And those who ate the loaves were about 5,000. Okay. Here we are. And I want to point out something, because for many of you, for many of you, I'm going to give you some simple steps that I want to get into this unbelief issue. We'll go as long as we can, and I'll pick up with this next week. Many of you aren't realizing that God's at work all around you. You get caught up with life, and our doubts and unbelief put this barrier between us and what God is doing. And you have to realize that God is working for good to do His good pleasure in your life. You can never forget that. Look, life is full. Stuff happens. Stuff, you know, I was a corporate exec once. I was a small business owner once. Then a pastor. I was a youth pastor. And you know, nothing changes. My whole life is managing interruptions. You have kids? I laughed when I ran into Jason yesterday at Target. We were both shopping. And he looked so tired. And I said, how much sleep have you been getting? He goes, oh, a couple hours here, a couple hours there. I said, well, just, you know, someone who's had 8 children, my words of advice to you, in about 2030, you'll get a full night's sleep. But you'll still worry. He goes, thanks, John. Listen, you are going to spend your entire life managing interruptions. You have issues. Some of you, your issues have situations and occurrences. And your situations are interrupting your other situations. You know? It's life. As you get older, your body will say to you, no, you're not. And you have to sit down. You don't have to get older. When your body says, no, you can't do that. I broke up ice this week. I know I'm not supposed to pick up a shovel, but I was at the food pantry and I opened the door and I looked at the drain and it was full of ice. I grabbed the shovel that was by the door and I just walked around going, just 2 scoops. And I threw my hip out. Come on. I'm just standing there going, ram. Shovel. Oh, what happened? Listen, stuff is going to happen in your life that's going to keep you, but it doesn't negate the fact that God is working to do and to will His good pleasure all around you, constantly. And if you allow God to be God, and if you choose to participate in the process, you will be blown away by the opportunities that are happening all around you. The other day lately I've been having some of my God moments at Target at the mall. I was shopping with my daughter.
Which one?
That one. And there are times she doesn't answer her phone and it's 1 million square feet and I'm not going to go looking for her. And I knew she was on a mission to get something. So I got my prescriptions and I went over to the bench and I sat down to mind my own business and wait for my daughter to check out. Because I knew the car is out there and this is where she has to end up. So I figured, I'll pass the time. I've got my phone and I'll chill out. And this gentleman sat down beside me. And he let out a huge sigh. And I couldn't pass up the opportunity to say, hey dude, what's up? And one word out of his mouth was, women. I said, what are you in for? And he goes on and tells me about his experience with his wife and how he said, in 10 minutes in the store, I'm in the doghouse. And we're unpacking. And we're sharing stories and we're talking. I don't even know his name. But at the end, he goes, you're a pretty wise guy. You're pretty savvy. I know I'm a pastor. Here's my card. And he's like, thank you, man. Thank you. Listen, I made the most of my situation. I was stranded. I couldn't leave. You don't show up with stuff from the pharmacy without the child and explain to your wife, well, I don't know where she is, I left her. You just don't show up without the kid, So it's not, listen, that was just a normal, one of the billion things that go on in my life on a daily basis, where I just choose to let God be God. He's there, He's doing, even though things seem to be helter-skelter, God has a plan and a purpose. And if you're not living that way, you're going to be tempted to doubt and fear and have unbelief. You've got to live that way. You have to sit back and say, listen, I know things are screwed up. I know there's a three-ring circus going around me, but God is at work all around me. This one example of loaves and fishes is just one of the many examples of Scripture where Jesus lived this out. He tried to get away from the nonsense, and it followed him. Who are you? You think you're above that? The second thing, and this is probably the most profound, and yet, if you get this one point, you'll find life a little easier. Ready? He starts with what we have and he blesses it. He starts with what you have and he blesses it. Next week I'm going to look at a situation with Moses. Moses is dealing with fear and doubt in his life. And he's standing there, the bush, it's burning, God's speaking to him, and God says to him, what's in your hand? Let's back up the truck and go back to your gifts. You Renaissance people, you people who can multitask. You got all these gifts, your abilities. You can act, you can write, you can dance, you can play the lute, you can do all this cool stuff, Yeah. You're Leonardo da Vinci. Do you know that Leonardo da Vinci was famous for one thing in his lifetime? Do you know what it was? And he was a rock star. They got him to all these courts of all these kings and people and got all his ideas funded. You know what it was? He was the world's best lute player. The dude could play guitar better than anybody in his lifetime. And he was a rock star. He got into these courts because he could jam. And while he was there, he probably sat during the meals and doodled on the tablecloth. And people said, what's that? This is some screwy idea. I'm thinking about doing this. And how much do you need? Oh, 40 lira, 1,000 lira. Okay, here. And he painted. I'm sure he could cut a rug too. He could dance. I mean, this guy had all the tools, all these gifts. But what do we remember him for? One lousy painting. It's not even a really good painting. It's not really big either. Listen. You know different. For many of you got 4 or 5 gifts. Man, I am so blown away. If you weren't here for the open mic night, you missed something. Because every single person in the room, other than me, virtually a couple of us, we were enjoying ourselves. What? Everybody in the room had a gift. I was blown away. I said, well, you play drums too? I mean, it was like one after another, after another, after another, after another, just taking turns, just blessing us with their gifts and talents. And it was so energizing. It was so cool. I can't wait for Friday night with poetry. Listen. God starts with what you have. It's Itzhak Perlman, one of my favorite artists of all time. He's crippled. He walks with 2 crutches. Was it polio? Polio? He's crippled. And yet he's the world's greatest violin player. And the most profound thing I ever heard him say in an interview about 20 years ago, and he was talking about, I had this gift, and I started when I was 3, and I kept going. I didn't give up. And he said, it's all about 10,000 hours. It's about time. You want to become great at one of your skills and abilities? You start small, and you keep chipping away at it, and you keep chipping away at it, and you be faithful to it, and you keep practicing at it. If you're an artist, paint every day. If you're a writer, write 15 minutes every day. Whatever it is that you do consistently a little bit every single day, and God will take that little bitty gift that you have, and He will embellish it, He will develop it, He will add to your skills, He will do so much cool stuff. Do you know, as a grade school kid, I was shy. I stuttered. I couldn't put 3 words together. I couldn't stand in front of a group of people. I was petrified. As a middle school kid, I always, I was gifted. I always tried to hide in the back of the room, even though I was gifted and I had all these abilities. By the time I got to high school, I got a little bit better at it. I finally was able to take a step out front and do solos and stuff like that with my instruments, even though I would draw stabs on my arms and write out the parts on my arm, just so that if I stuttered or if I got lost, if I got fearful, I could look down and see where I'm supposed to be. I did all these little tricks to get me to where I was. And 10th grade was my epiphany. 10th grade was that moment where something really happened, and it was a guy named Ralph Coturo. Ralph traveled with Benny Goodman. If you watch the Benny Goodman movie, he's in it. I can point him out. He's one of the trumpet players. And Ralph was a jazz legend. He played in the big bands. He traveled. He was actually in the military with Glenn Miller. When Glenn Miller died, he was with the band. All his stories. And one of the stumbling points that I had, I was going up for my first competition, and Ralph said, you're going to have to do sight reading, but I'm going to teach you the old school method, the trick on how to sight read. He said, first you got to clear your head. And then when you look at the page, you got to sing it in your head. And you got to feel it in your body. You see, you take your hand, you put your hand on your chest, and you tap out the rhythm. He said, you feel it. You move your body with the rhythm. And you look at the page and you hear it in your head, then you play it. He said, that's how you sight read. Well, I went to districts that year. I was a 10th grader. No one believed in me. Even my music director at school said, this kid's got no shot. On sight reading, I scored a 203 out of a 225. I didn't just lead my instrument class in sight reading. I not only led the entire district in sight reading, I was one of the top 5 sight readers in the entire state of Pennsylvania. All because I took this little gift that I had, and I learned from somebody who invested in me, and I embellished and grew it and became something. What do you have? What's your gift? You need to embrace it and say, listen, I'm going to manage the interruptions. I'm going to choose to participate in what God's doing all around me. But you know what? I'm going to be grateful. I'm going to praise God for the gift that He's given me, and I'm going to press in on this. I can't wait to see in 10 years what God's going to do with this. Managing technology is not always easy. Last little thing. All of us have been called and sent. Notice something when you go back to the verses 4 through 6 in that passage that we read in Mark. He sent everybody. Every single one of you is a missionary. One of my Widener students the other day, we were talking about just life. And he said to me, he said, I realized that I'm a missionary. Every club, every organization, every meeting I have, I'm taking Jesus Christ and representing Him in all that I do. I said, that's so cool that you get that. I said, now, just so you understand, that when you start organizing the other missionaries, you become a church planter. He goes, no, I don't want to be like my dad. No. But it's so true. Every single one of us. If we choose to participate in what God's doing, if we take whatever we start with and just be faithful with it and press in on it, you realize that He is sending all of us out there to do something. There is stuff that will only happen, that will only get done if you show up and participate. Do you hear that? There are people who will be in heaven because you decided to be a part of the process. Listen, I'm just a noisy mouthpiece. I'm just a noisy mouthpiece. But everywhere I go, I'm reminded of the fact that God's working. Yesterday I used a Christmas gift someone gave me. My wife and I went to lunch at Outback. It was so sweet, just the two of us. We got alone, we had our meal, we're enjoying ourselves. And you know what happens? Someone walks up to the table and says, "Pastor Chuck, how are you?" And I have that, oh no, feeling over me because I'm looking at this gentleman and I haven't a clue who he is. I'm like, this guy knows me. He really knows me. And he's talking about the arts. Well, that doesn't help because I'm involved in like 5 different artistic things. I'm like, okay, we've narrowed it down to only 1 million possibilities, And at that moment I said, "Have you met my wife, Joy?" And he introduces himself. He goes, "I'm a friend of Crispy." It's like, okay, he's a filmmaker. I now know this, okay? It was like, but it was like, okay, now we've narrowed down which barn door stall we're now about to walk through, But listen, at that moment, I wasn't on a date with my wife. I was representing the King of Kings. I said, "Oh, by the way, I don't know if Chris got a hold of you, but we're doing an indie film thing after church on Sunday night. You're welcome to come hang." Oh, wow, I have to follow up with him, talk with him, And just one more day, one more opportunity in the day of my life. I can't go anywhere. I'm America's guest. Everyone knows me. My kids hate it. They really do. I'm in Virginia. We're going to check out of the hotel, and somebody walks up to me. "Chuck, how are you?" My daughter goes, "Really? It's 7:30 in the morning. We're starting off for our day where can't we go anywhere, Lord, without But yeah, you're sent. You're called. And God's got so many cool experiences for you. So take the stinking mask off and get in the game. Really. It's that simple. It is that simple. I pray with all that we have going on this month. We're celebrating the arts. It's a cool thing. I'm hoping and praying that you have an epiphany like I did in 10th grade, where you realize, I'm good at that. Where you realize, I've got a gift. That this month, you can look around you and say, wow, I didn't know all these people were so gifted. And at some point in time, you not only realize that we're all so gifted, but now, why aren't we encouraging each other to use these gifts, to press in on what God had, to be able to invite each other to grow together? I think it's going to be a cool 3 weeks. I really do. But you got to take the mask off. You got to start the day and say, you know what? There's masks on the table. By the way, thank you, Hare, for loaning them to me. But these masks are to remind you that this is where they belong. On your dressing table. On your dining room table. They don't belong in your face. Because God's got some amazing stuff for you to experience. And you can break free of your fear, of your doubt, and your unbelief. Let's pray as you guys come up with it. Lord, I pray for my friends today that we would break through and break free of all the nonsense in our lives. But Lord, all the stuff that troubles us, all the hurts, all the fear that we struggle with, the doubt that we seem to put on ourselves. Lord, may we break free and take the mask off today and serve you with a whole heart. Ready to experience you, ready to start with where we are, with what we have, and just to go and taste and see that you do good. Bless now in your son's name. Amen.
Amen.